Hey everybody, welcome back to Eluda Racing. So in today's video, what we're going to be doing is an installation of a product that I bought. It's called the Volt Blaster, and as you can see, this is a nice little guy right here. This is made by a company called Modern Muscle Car. You can find them online. I bought this off of eBay. Check out down below. There will be a link down below. But yeah, anyway, so this is a pretty neat little guy here, and what this is designed to do is when your car comes off of throttle at approximately 3.8 volts, this is hooked up in conjunction with your alternator and your throttle position sensor. And basically what this does is as you're coming up to roughly 30% throttle, 40% throttle, what this does is this increases the voltage to your entire charging circuit, which is essentially giving more voltage to your entire car. And in previous videos we've kind of talked about voltage and the significance of voltage for Grand Nationals, and this is something that goes along with that. Real easy installation, start to finish. This is probably a 15 to 20 minute job. Basic hand tools are required, no special tools. 5/16 wrench to disconnect your battery and to disconnect one of the or remove one of the bolts on the alternator, because this is going to be mounted essentially right here on the alternator. So you need to take this bolt off. We need to remove the main battery cable from the back of the alternator, the main charge, the output at the output of the alternator. We need to disconnect the negative battery terminal, negative battery cable, I'm sorry, which is a good idea anytime you're working on a car and you're doing anything, especially when you're touching the alternator or anything like that, because that's hot over there, that's live. So that if you arc out or anything like that, you could cause damage to the car. So you always want to remove your ground cable before working on the car in any way. So yeah, basically what we're going to do here is pretty straightforward. Let's talk and let's get to work. So first we're going to start off, like I said, let's disconnect this battery cable. And this, like I said, this is going to be a 5/16. You could probably take off the positive. It's a little bit easier to get to, but for whatever reason they always say take off the negative, and I think it's to prevent arcing. You know, if you're taking off a positive and you short out to something, you could get shocked or you could cause damage. You're taking off the ground and you touch something, you're just grounding the ground to itself. So I would imagine that's the whole purpose of removing the ground over the positive. So we need to take that off. Next thing you're going to do is we're going to be removing the cable here on the back of the alternator. Now in a previous video, if you looked, and if you haven't watched it, this is an upgraded alternator. This is a 140 amp high amp alternator. This is an upgraded alternator over the stock alternator. In doing that, this has changed, and this is something we're going to go over here in a minute when we get to that part. But this is now a 9/16 nut, where the factory is a 10 millimeter. It's a much smaller post right here coming off of the alternator because of it being a lesser amperage. By me going up in amp, this post is larger, so it's going to be a different tool. If you have a stock alternator, this is going to be a 10 millimeter nut, not a 9/16. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out. But the steps in the installation process does not change whether it's a stock alternator or an upgraded alternator. So the next thing you're going to do, like I said, we need to disconnect this. Now whenever you're doing this and you're loosening one of these nuts, you always want to hold this cable, because this post can turn inside the alternator and you could damage the alternator. So you always want to have a hand on the cable and then loosen that, and you want to prevent this from possibly rotating, which can then damage the connection internally on the alternator. So be careful and use caution when you're doing that. It's going to be a little bit tricky here with me in one hand. So what I'm going to do is just give it a shot, and if it feels like it's going to move, I'm going to stop, and I'll just turn the camera off. Yeah, she came right loose. Now the other thing you have to remember is when you're assembling stuff like this, don't torque down on this. This does not have to be super tight. You want it nice and snug, and that's all you need to do. If you over tighten this stuff, you're just going to damage it, and you're doing nothing. You're not benefiting anything. You're just taking a chance on damaging something. So that needs to come off. The next thing you need to do is on the back of the alternator you have this brown wire, and this is referred to as a signal wire. This wire is what energizes the field in the alternator, makes the alternator start to produce power. It needs to be excited, it needs to be turned on, so to speak. It doesn't just produce power just because the motor is running. It needs to have something to tell it to turn on internally, because these alternators have an internal voltage regulator, and essentially that is what the volt blaster is doing, is it is modifying the internal voltage regulator. A standard alternator will produce anywhere from 12.8 volts to 13.2 volts. That's just industry standard. Now I know there's guys out there that are like, oh no dude, it's actually 14. Okay, well I'm giving basic examples. I'm not giving factual facts for every single alternator out in production. Standard alternators, a battery resting is anywhere from 12.4 to 12.8 volts. We need to exceed that in order to charge that battery and provide adequate power for the rest of the car. So industry standard for an alternator, I'll repeat myself, is 12.8 to 13.2 volts. As demand increases, accessories and stuff like that, that can go up to 14.4 volts. Anything over 14.4 volts in a standard car, anything above that would be considered overcharging, and that is essentially what the volt blaster is going to do. We're going to increase that threshold from that 13 whatever up to actually 15 volts. That little bit of extra voltage will go a long way in optimizing voltage to all the accessories on a high performance car, and that's what we're trying to achieve here today, is we're raising that standard 14.4 up to 15. And a lot of people are going to say, well, what's that? What's an extra half volt? It makes a big difference when you go from the front of a car all the way back to the fuel pump, or to your injectors, or to your ignition system, your fans. A half a volt can make a huge difference on how the car is going to run and how the cars are going to perform. So that's the purpose of doing this. We are enhancing and we are optimizing every aspect of the car's ignition and fuel delivery system to get peak performance out of the car. It increases longevity, and it just makes the car run much more efficient. Anytime you have low voltage or you have voltage drops, you have resistance that gets increased. Increased resistance results in heat, and it can degrade the wiring, and it can damage parts and cause them to prematurely fail. So optimum performance, or I should say optimum voltage, is key to a car running properly and performing properly. So once we get this off, the next thing we need to do is we need to remove this signal wire. Now if you get to the back of the alternator, you're going to be able to see the signal wire just snaps on. Put your finger underneath. I've already popped this loose, but you pull out on this tab right here, this guy pops off. And the reason we need to take this off is because this is where one of the wires for the voltmaster is going to go. It's going to actually go inside here. Now yours is going to have a rubber cap that goes over here. It's a waterproof protector that you're going to need to get a dental pick or a scratch awl, something small. I'll show you the difference. So here's the factory one, and if you see it's got one small hole. Well, the new one, same thing, rubber, and it has two holes now, because when we install this brown wire is going to be inserted into that harness, and this is what's going to actually change the voltage output of the alternator, is going to be this brown wire. So what we need to do to install this is a couple things. First, once you get that signal wire removed, you gotta pull this off. Like I said, you gotta dig this guy out. Now if you look on the side, you can see there's this white clip. This white clip slides from one side over to the other side. And if you look down inside there, you're gonna see there's 3 spots. You're gonna see the first hole is empty. Second hole has that brown wire, and then there's a larger hole to what would be the left side of this plug in the direction that I'm holding it. That is where that other brown wire is going to go. It's going to snap into there, and then that clip is going to hold it in place. Now for this, I'm going to have to set the camera down. I'm going to loosen this, and then we'll get going here, and I'll show you how I did it. Okay, so I went ahead and I installed this wire. I'm going to go back over how I did that so you guys can see. If you flip the plug over facing you, like so, you can see the white clip that I'm talking about. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to very carefully slide this white clip to the right. You're going to make this clip slide this way, slide away from it. And you only want to go far enough to make that clip get away from this far left hole. Enough to that way, because what you don't want is you don't want the other one to fall out. Don't take this clip all the way out. You could damage it, or the other wire could come out, and then you're trying to put 2 wires back in there. So the clip just slides down in there. You're going to hear a very distinct click. You don't need to put it in and push real hard. You need to make sure that there's a snap that's on this brown wire that I installed, and it goes to the bottom, and then it'll snap into this housing or this plug end, and then you just slide the clip back over, and then you'll feel the clip click also. Once that is in place, this is all okay. Now what we can do is we can then install the new rubber piece that will keep that watertight. Now when you're doing this, if you wanted, you could probably use a little bit of dielectric grease. I'm not going to do that simply because this car is going to be kept in the garage. It's never going to see rain or snow or anything like that. So I'm not really worried about any type of corrosion or anything like that. So this grommet it has slits in it, which will make it easier to put together. I'm not going to be able to do it with the camera. Yes, I know I should have a tripod or something like that. I'm sorry guys, I'm still trying to get used to doing the whole camera thing. So let me throw this in real quick, and then I'll show you how it looks after. Alright, so we got that back in. Looks perfect. You wouldn't even know that this was something that was added on. This is that's one of the nice things about this Volt Blaster from Modern Muscle Cars. Their top-notch quality is second to none, and I mean, this is like factory correct looking stuff right here. So once you get that in, you're going to go ahead and plug this back in. Hear a nice click. You want to make sure that's clicked. And yeah, that portion is done. So now we've got a couple more things that we got to do, and this is, like I said, this start to finish, this is like a 15-minute job, maybe less if you're not taping it like I am. But one thing I want to mention is by upgrading the alternator like I had done on this car, this post, like I've mentioned before, is larger. So when I did this upgrade I had mentioned in that video, and if you haven't watched it, please go watch it, I had to go with a larger gauge charging wire, larger lug for the end. This Volt Blaster, I'm sorry, came with a standard, it was thinking I was having a 10 millimeter. I had to change this as well to be the correct size for my particular setup. And I had to change that. It's just a ring terminal, blue style or blue size, and I don't know what the terminal size would be. It's a 9/16 nut, but I don't know what that would be. 5/16, 3/8, something like that. Ring terminal, I think. But yeah, so your red wire is going to go onto the alternator. The black wire here, this terminal is going to actually, it's a ground wire, and that's going to go right here. So that's what we're going to be doing next. Is our next step is going to be take off this bolt off the alternator. Now, whether it's the stock alternator or the aftermarket alternator, that bolt size is the same. It's a 5/16. And remember, they're tight, but you don't want to over tighten these. You could crack this case right here. So when you go to reinstall this, put the terminal on there, get it nice and snug, and then just snug it down. Don't over tighten it, because you're gonna be pissed if you break your brand new alternator or your old alternator, whichever it may be. But go ahead and pull this bolt off. And we'll mount this up. Actually, what I would do if I was you guys, when you do this install, for ease of installation, I would do the ground first, because by doing the ground first, it gives this thing a place to, it's in place, and it's easier to route the wires, and you're not kind of letting it just dangle down like I am. So I probably should have did the ground wire first. I'm just going by the steps that they give in their directions, but I think directions are kind of overrated sometimes. Sometimes you can't go for them like that. So we had a little guest there. Sorry, I had to stop the camera. But yeah, like I was saying, I would probably mount this first, and then that just kind of gives you the ability to kind of lay things out, route the wires in the manner that you want to route them, and then it just keeps it also from kind of just laying on the ground, or just kind of laying down in the engine. So get this nut out, bolt. Anything else I would use a socket wrench, but with it being aluminum, I want to try to be a little bit careful. So yeah, now you need to fish that through. And that's really all this thing does. This thing just kind of sits here like that. You're going to want to tighten this back up. Remember, we don't want to over tighten this. Now, just to let you guys know, these are not waterproof. This is not a sealed deal right here. So if you ever were to power wash your motor or do any type of detailing or spray anything on there, you would want to be careful. And I like to use like a sandwich bag, and you put that over your breathers and different things, and just do yourself a favor and be careful, because if you power wash this and get it wet, you're going to short it out and it's going to go bad, and it won't leave you stranded, it's just not going to work anymore, and you don't want to ruin a $50 part. Like I said, we want to get this snug, but we don't want to over tighten this. We don't want to take a chance on damaging this case for this alternator, and we also don't want to damage this ring terminal. So you want to make sure that's down flush on the body of the alternator. Feel like it's snug, and then just another quarter of a turn. And there, now we have a perfect ground. So yeah, that would be the next step that you got to do. We're going to go ahead and throw on the trigger wire. Now this is where I like to start doing things. I'm big on aesthetics and laying things out and having them look good. So one thing that I did on this one, when I did this terminal, I actually cut off this wire. This red wire was actually really long, like this blue wire, which was just way too long. So I cut it down to suit my needs and what I thought would look better. I cut off 6-8 inches of it when I put the new ring terminal on there. And if you want to, you could do that as well, or you could leave it. It's up that's your own personal preference. I just think really long wires look nasty, and it takes away from everything. So get that on there. Get your main wire on there, your charging wire, lock washer, and your nut. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot this down and get rid of all that slack and hide that. I think that looks a lot better. We want to snug that back up. Paying attention to not over tightening it. Can't emphasize that enough when you guys are doing this type of stuff, especially on things like this, battery terminals, alternators. Anytime you're dealing with stuff that's fragile, aluminum and stuff like that, it's important to not over tighten them. And if there are torque specs available, which I bet you there's probably one for this, that's what torque specs are for, guys. Follow them and you'll save yourself heartache and problems down the road. Nice and snug. So now the last thing we need to do is blue wire is actually going to go over excuse me, and this taps into the throttle position sensor, which is on the other side over here. And they give you a nice little wire tap, which if you don't know what a wire tap is, this is your wire tap right here. You take this and this gets crimped onto the blue wire. The blue wire is your your trigger wire. So this is where this is going to go, and this is where you're going to need some pliers or some lineman pliers or whatever. But we'll go ahead and we'll tap or crimp this on here, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so I got the wire tap in. It was a little bit of a pain. I actually ended up dropping it and had to find another one, but luckily I have a bunch of them. So yeah, like I said, this is going to be tapped onto crimped onto the blue wire. Now you're probably looking here and saying, hey, mine doesn't look like that. I don't have this. And the reason that my car looks different than some of yours, or may look different, is because I have this guy right here, and this is a TPS enhancer by Casper's Electronics. And basically what that does is that gives you full voltage at partial throttle. Same thing. I think you're seeing the trend here. The voltage. Everything is increasing voltage. So that is why mine looks a little bit different. Normally you would just have this plug right here and it would be plugged into the TPS. But this is kind of a splicer, and it goes in series with the factory plug. So that's why that looks a little bit different. But that's really all that does. That blue wire gets crimped into there. And what that's going to do, that's your trigger wire. So when you are off throttle, or you're hitting that 30% throttle, that's going to tell the volt blaster to step up that voltage, and then it continues to do that until you reach wide open throttle. Now the cool thing about this is you have the ability, when this car is running, you have this test button, and you hit that button, this red light's going to come on, the voltage is going to increase. They recommend you setting it at 15 volts. And the way you test that is, what I would do is you're going to go ground and positive with a voltmeter. If you have a ScanMaster or any of those things, they'll also tell you your voltage inside the car, but it's a little bit harder to do that if you're by yourself. So what I would do is I would set up a voltmeter here and here, or at the battery. You could do it at the battery, but I would recommend it right here. This is right off the alternator, and this is where it's going to be most accurate. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to hit that test button, get a voltage reading. If you take this cap off right here, there's a little screw in there. You can go up a tiny bit at a time, and you're going to crank that up until you get that 15 volts. Do not exceed 15 volts. Long term, that will start to cause damage to your components, especially on a car that's a daily driver, or a car that you're going to be driving around for extended periods of time. If it was a race car, you could go up to 16, or give or take. But for a daily driven car or street car, you're not going to want to exceed that 15 volts. So sometimes more isn't always better. So we're going to increase it, but we're not going to go crazy. So what you're going to want to do, like I said, is once you get this all together and you're set up, you're going to get a voltmeter, and then you're going to take a test, a voltage reading right there, and then we'll do that as well. I just got to grab my meter. All right, so we got everything all set up, and like I said, you're going to want to get a meter, and you're going to want to do your test here at the alternator. Don't do it over at the battery. So what I suggest is we're going to take 3 measurements, and I think that will help just to see how well your charging system is working. I think we need to take a base reading right now with the car not running, and we'll see what our state of charge is for the battery currently. And to do that, like I said, you're just going to black wire, or black probe is going to go as your ground, red is going to be your positive. It's a little bit tricky with one hand, bear with me. But there we go. We're going to look, we're getting 12.84 volts. Now this car, because it's in the garage, I keep it on a battery tender. I'm a big believer in battery tenders. If you have, you know, a car collection, or you have side-by-sides or boats or whatever it is, any of your toys, it's a good idea to keep everything on a tender, because it will extend the life of the batteries dramatically. So that being said, that's why we're a little bit high at sitting with the car not running, 12.4 or 12.8, because I just took the battery tender off prior to starting this video. So normally you're going to be, you know, in that 12.4 to 12.6 range, maybe 12.7, 12.8 if you're just coming off of a tender, but that would be normal. Now when we start the car, we're going to take another reading, and we're going to want to see right around 13.2 like I had mentioned before. So let's go ahead and start the car up and see what we get. Alright, so we got the car running. This is a cold start, obviously, so the car's running a little bit high right now. The RPMs are a little bit high, and with that being said, I'm expecting the voltage to be a little bit high as well. So if you look there, we're at 14.6, 14.7 at idle, and the car is not idled down yet. It's not warmed up yet. Now we're going to go ahead and try to hit this button and see what we got. And it's probably going to be 15 to 16 volts. So yeah, see, we're almost 16 volts, but that's going to come down as the RPMs come down. So there you go. Very, very basic, easy install. Something that I would highly recommend any Grand National, or you could use these on the Typhoon, the Syclone. You could use this on the Turbo Trans Am, the 89 Trans Am that's turbo. This is interchangeable with any of those cars, and it will help them all dramatically. So yeah, that's a Volt Blaster install, start to finish. If you have any questions, just real quick now, you saw, you know, how we did that. We did the test button, you hit the button and the light comes on. That means when the red light's on, that means this is active, it's increasing your voltage. If once you do all this, you find that that voltage is too low or too high, you want to get right around that 15 volt, 15.25, give or take. Right around there is the sweet spot you're looking for. And the way you achieve that is, once the car is running, you're going to want to pull this little cap off, use a little flat screwdriver in there. With the car running, hit the test button, and then you adjust that accordingly, up or down, whichever you need to do to get to that proper voltage. Now, I would highly recommend when you're doing that, because you've got a lot of stuff going on, one, you're going to want to be careful on your leads from your meter. You've got a serpentine belt here, you've got your fan and stuff like that going as far as from the alternator. So just be mindful of where all your tools are at and where your leads and stuff are. You don't want to have them get sucked up in there and damage a meter, get hurt, whatever. And the other thing I would recommend is, when you're doing this, if you can get the alligator attachments for your meter, I would recommend using those, and you could clip it on here, and then clip on your positive there. And then that way you're not trying to hold that meter. You can set it up like I did, and then you can do your fine-tune adjusting. But yeah, once you get everything set, like I said, you should be able to run that, you know, around 15 to 15.25 volts. I wouldn't go any higher than that. That's per Modern Muscle Cars recommendation. So yeah, please like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope I was thorough enough, not too thorough and not long-winded. You know, it seems like when I make these videos, if I make them too short, people say I didn't make them long enough. If I make them too long, people say that they could have did the same video in 5 minutes. I doubt the quality would have been as good as mine if I do a 15-minute video and they're doing 5, but hey, whatever. So yeah, please like and subscribe, and check back, because we're going to be doing a lot more videos here real quick. It's nice and warm here in Michigan, and this thing's going to be getting ready to be taken out to paint soon. So I'm going to get all these little things wrapped up before I do that. I don't want to be leaning over a car with a $5,000 paint job on it. So yeah, keep checking back, like, subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, guys.